Trump administration has moved to cancel temporary asylum protections for some 4,000 Myanmar nationals in the U.S., terminating the temporary protected status designation granted to them since 2021. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, announced this decision, saying a review of current conditions in Myanmar no longer justified its status. And she cited the planned elections and the end to Myanmar's state of emergency as evidence of an improving situation. The order is expected to come into effect in 60 days.
The Trump administration is canceling deportation protection for some Myanmar refugees.
And that means the government could send them home. Fox 9's Mike Manzoni is following the latest developments for us. And Mike, Minnesota is home to thousands of refugees from Myanmar.
Yeah, Kelsey and Randy, more than 20,000 Karen people live here in the state. The Karen are an ethnic group from that country. This decision would only impact those here under something called temporary protected status, and not all refugees have that status. The Department of Homeland Security says Myanmar, also sometimes called by its former name Burma, no longer meets the requirements for TPS. And that is because the government says it is now safe for refugees to return home. Myanmar has faced instability in recent years after a military takeover in 2021.
Well, the U.S. government is set to strip thousands of Myanmar nationals living in America of their temporary immigration status. The Trump administration cites elections planned by the ruling military junta as evidence the situation in the war-torn country is improving and safe enough for citizens to return. Thomas Keane, senior consultant on Myanmar and Bangladesh with the International Crisis Group, says that's far from reality.
Before we dive into today's conversation, I'd like to say a brief word about the nature of our long-form interviews here at Insight Myanmar podcast. Simply put, all our discussions are guest-driven. Our discussions go deep into the expertise and perspectives of our guests because it is our belief that when we are able to open up to the experience and voice of others, well, we all learn. So with that, let's sit back and enjoy what follows.
Welcome back to the Inside Myanmar podcast. My name is E, and I will be your host today. For today's episode, we are joined by Simon Billenness. So our avid listeners to our podcast might be familiar with his name already, since he was just on our podcast a few months ago, and he talked about the U.S. sanction on Myanmar and his role in lobbying the Congress on Burma policy. So to our listeners, if you haven't listened to it yet, I highly recommend listening to Simon's previous conversation on our podcast, episode number 378. It's titled Of Bills and Sanctions. So the majority of our conversation today will be about the termination of TPS, or temporary protective status, granted by the United States. And to talk more about that, I want to welcome Simon. Welcome back, Simon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here again.
It's really good to have you. And, to our listeners, Simon and I are actually real life friends. we both live in Washington, D.C., and also we have like cross paths during my past life as a journalist for VOA. So, I was covering for U.S. Congress issue and U.S. policy on Burma. And to introduce Simon is the director of the Campaign for New Myanmar with over 3 decades of knowledge and experience in lobbying Congress into taking action on Burma policy. So before we go deeper into the implications of what it means for TPS to be terminated and whether it means a change in Burma policy, I want to start by asking you, what you said you've been busy. And so what have been keeping you occupied regarding Burma policy on Congress?
Well, we were expecting bad news November 25th, because that was the date when the U.S. policy of temporary protected status for Burmese refugees, that was when that was set to expire. I was part of a group of over 100 organizations, including many Burmese community groups, not just in the U.S., but around the world, who wrote a letter to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, giving out clear reasons why it was in the interests, the national security interests of the U.S. to continue to grant temporary protected status for Burmese refugees in the U.S., and how it was also in alignment with American values, including protection of people's human rights and also their freedom of conscience and freedom to express their religion, all of which is largely not possible in Burma. So, we tried for months since June to get a meeting with the Department of Homeland Security to go over our concerns and to give them what we thought was a very good analysis as to why they should continue TPS. But after numerous requests, they did not set up a meeting with us. And then on November 24th, we saw the note in the Federal Register where the Department of Homeland Security was made an announcement it would be terminating TPS for Burmese refugees in 60 days. So it's going to happen in late January. But they also put out a very damaging statement that was extremely false and misleading about the conditions in Burma to justify this decision. But the language in that represents some major departures for U.S. policy towards Burma. And that's also was very concerning to us.
Did they give you a reason why DHS won't meet you anymore?
They did not give us the courtesy of a reason.
That somehow gauge the temperature of how they see the issue.
That was very telling, yes.
Yeah. I want to go to a bit of background on what happened to state the facts. So on November 25th, 2025, Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, published a notice that terminate TPS for country of Burma. And so with that notice, it affects about almost 4,000 Myanmar nationals who are currently in America. And with this termination notice, it means, like you said, by the end of January, the individuals will not have status to be in America by TPS standards. So what were they to do right now if one were a TPS holder? What happens now?
Quite frankly, the situation is fairly bleak for Burmese in the US under TPS, particularly if they are only in the US under the temporary protected status program. I saw a heart-rending exchange of emails between a Burmese refugee here in the US and an immigration lawyer. And the refugee was asking, what recourse do I have? What can I do to stay in the US? And the lawyer skilled immigration lawyer, basically laid out in very clearly that they basically had no recourse to stay in the U.S. right now.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was very bleak, and it was heartrending to read.
That is heartbreaking. When you, with the 100 organization, wrote to DHS, stating that these having TPS still exists, align with American values, did it stick? Is there any notice from their part on why or other reason they might keep it on?
I mean, we're not privy to the thinking, if you can call it thinking, that went on at DHS when they wrote this policy. We made it very clear in our letter that this was to grant temporary protected status for Burmese refugees who came here after the coup. I mean, let's be very clear about who these people are. A lot of them are Burmese who are studying in the US when the coup happened, and they obviously don't want to go back to Burma because they've been supporting the civil disobedience movement from afar. They've been speaking out publicly in the US about the need to counter this coup by the junta. A lot of them are members of ethnic and religious minorities, including, we believe, many Christians. We believe one of the people here under TPS is a Catholic priest. And one of the things we pointed out in our letter was, I think, quite frankly, the Burmese who are here in the US, these are amongst the very best friends of the US in Burma. These are people who have been attracted to the US because of the US's longtime support for the Burmese people and their struggle for democracy and their struggle for their human rights. And so there's a big alignment of interests between these Burmese TPS recipients and the US. These are among the best and the brightest of the Burmese people. That's why they're studying here, for master's degrees and other forms of education. And so this was, I think this represents basically a slap in the face by the US of the best friends of the US amongst the Burmese people. And that's what really sticks in my craw. But one of the things we point out was we point out how over the last 30 years, US support for the Burmese people, for the democracy movement, for human rights in Burma, this is aligned with US national security interests. There was a threat to US national security from the junta, ranging from the heroin produced in areas under junta control that finds its way onto the streets of the US. Also, there's a threat to the American people from the scam centers that, again, operate under the junta and are scamming Americans for thousands of dollars every day. And so the junta has never been a friend of the US. And the junta has always actively acted against US national security interests in the region. And so we made that point that granting temporary protected status for Burmese refugees was in the US national interest. And we also underscored how this supported American values, not just support for human rights in total, but specifically in alignment with the U.S. Interest and in promoting people's free exercise of their religion around the world. Religious freedom is one of the human rights that the U.S. has been traditionally very supportive of around the world. And a number of the people here under TPS are Christians. They're Baptists, they're Catholics, they're Presbyterians. And so, there is this huge contradiction between the U.S.'s support for religious freedom and, as evidenced by the Office of International Religious Freedom that operates inside the State Department, the Office of Faith that operates inside the White House. And I've been talking to a number of conservative Republicans who have been outspoken in their support for religious freedom. And I was making the point that why would you send your brothers and sisters in Christ back to Burma, a country that is a hellscape due to the junta's attacks on communities of all kinds, but including many Christian communities, a junta that has destroyed churches in airstrikes, also mosques, also Buddhist temples and other community centers. And so why would you send Burmese Christians back to Burma when the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has documented extensively on the religious persecution of both Christians and Muslims in Burma? This just does not fit with U.S. foreign policy towards Burma. And this is our main problem with the statement of U.S. policy made by the Department of Homeland Security. At one point, they have described the elections in Burma, the sham elections that are coming up this month, they have described them as, quote, free and fair, in direct contradiction to all the statements coming out of Congress, bipartisan statements who have highlighted the sham nature of these elections. They have also, DHS also touted the ceasefires in Burma. And these are ceasefires, again, sham ceasefires that were forced on ethnic religious organizations with pressure from the junta and pressure from China. And I put it to a staff member just last night who works on U.S. policy towards China and U.S. policy towards countering China. And I said, how is DHS supporting China in Burma? How does that advance U.S. national security interests? It does not. It does not. And I think that there are a number of people in the administration, both at the White House and the State Department, who know that this DHS policy towards Burma is wrong and is a misstatement of U.S. policy towards Burma, and so we've been working with people in the administration. We've been reaching people in administration. We've been reaching people in Congress with this message, and we want the Department of Homeland Security to restore temporary protected status for Burmese refugees in the U.S. We also want the Department of Homeland Security to withdraw in its entirety this statement of policy and with all this false and misleading language about the situation in Burma.
You have pointed out so many good points, and there seemed to be a disengagement between the reality of what's going on in Myanmar. And according to the statement that you cited, it says that there seemed to be stability, right? It acknowledged that there might be humanitarian issues going on in Myanmar, but they are in the statement of the DHS decided that the end of the state of emergency, a constitutional timeline for elections, a credible permanent ceasefire agreement, and the increased ability of local authorities to deliver public services mark substantial steps towards political stability and national reconciliation. These are direct quotes from the statement. And there seem to be a misunderstanding between departments, or because you have been lobbying the Congress, and there seem to be people who are knowledgeable about this issue in the administration, and yet a statement like this came out of DHS. And with your experience of working over 30 years in U.S. policy regarding Myanmar, have you seen an action like this being completely withdrawn or reversed? And since TPS has been started around 1990, so have you seen is there evidence that it has happened before?
I think, a number of things. I think we've seen a number of things around U.S. foreign policy, and part of it is it's not unusual for different departments of the U.S. government to have different perspectives on Burma. I know back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was definitely a different perspective between the State Department that was supporting the democracy movement and opposing the junta, and parts of the administration, such as the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, who was trying to work with the junta to stop the flow of heroin to the U.S., but obviously ignoring the fact that the junta was deeply involved in the heroin trade, as were a number of their business cronies and ethnic minority allies. So this is not unusual to see this difference of approach between different departments. I think this kind of different messaging from different departments is more pronounced in this second Trump administration. Because what you have here is DHS making a statement on the conditions in Burma with the sole purpose of underpinning, in both policy terms and also legally, their decision to terminate temporary protected status for Burmese refugees. And I think that DHS knew exactly what it was doing. DHS knew that this was false and misleading. They knew that this was counter to U.S. foreign policy and national interests in Burma. And they simply did not care. All DHS cared about was, here are 4,000 people, Burmese, who we could kick out of the country and meet our quotas for deportation. That's the reason why this DHS statement is there. And that's the reason why it's so discordant with U.S. foreign policy, not just by the administration, but also particularly by Congress.
It's disheartening, but the almost 4,000 people, 3,969 people to be exact, are the Myanmar nationals that are TPS holder. And it might just be a number to the United States administration. And for our listeners and for people who are interested in Myanmar, I want to put real stories in the numbers. So I know a few people who are TPS holder, but one particular case I want to point out. This person, who is a young person in his 20s, came to the United States to study for college for 4 years. And while he was in America, the pandemic happened. And because of the border closing, he could not return home. And shortly after the pandemic in 2021, February, the coup happened. So that is a double whammy for his case, with the additional financial difficulty for his parents back home. And now he is stuck in America, unable to go back home. And with that, he has to apply for temporary protected status under the former President Biden's administration. And he got the TPS that helped him sustain his education, and he could stay in America legally and finish his education. Now, today, he has finished his college degree and is qualified to be interning at a good corporate firm. And he has been working very hard, doing great, and so good that his employer has decided to extend his internship and also pay him for the good work that he's doing. His life was set to, work hard after college, and he did everything by the book legally. But on November 25, 2025, with the statement coming out with the termination of TPS, everything is in shambles. So by late January, he would have to return home, since, the statement state that it is safe for him to return home. But in reality, because he is a young man in his 20s, it is the prime age for him to be recruited into the Myanmar Junta's army, even if by any chance he did not protest, or he did not do CDM movement or civil disobedience movement, or he publicly say anything bad about the junta at all. And let's say he is just clear from all of that and is capable of going back home, according to the statement, that would put him into the bucket of the people who might be recruited for the conscription law. And that is so heartbreaking. And I want to share this personal story to put the anecdote to one of the 4,000 people that are affected by the TPS termination. It's frustrating and heartbreaking, and I wish we have a way to help him or people like him. Simon, do you have any advice for that?
Yeah. Well, frankly, it is bleak. And I remember when the Trump administration first came in, over a year ago, when Trump was elected, my advice to Burmese people here under TPS was to get other status, political asylum claim, go for citizenship, get a green card, marry an American, that's what I've done twice. But, but, I'm British, I only recently became a citizen myself in 2022. But also I said, you don't want to be in a situation where you could be deported back to Burma. You need to find a third country like Canada, Europe, Australia. Find a third country that you can go to if you have to leave the US on an expedited basis. And so I know a number of, we don't know for sure all of these cases. I've heard a number of cases. I've heard a number of people come up to me with their stories about being under TPS right now. And a number of my friends, just like a number of your friends, are here under TPS. And I'm every day I'm hearing from another person under TPS asking what they can do. And so, but we don't have full information. I was asked recently. Been trying to get a meeting with the White House Office of Faith Paula White, I believe, is the head of that. And one of the questions was, what information do you have? What statistics do you have on the Burmese people in the US under TPS? And I don't have those statistics because that information is only available to us on this anecdotal basis by people contacting us and volunteering their information to us. There's nowhere we can go to find out exactly who these 4,000 odd people are. We have, I know about 10 people I know. I have 10 anecdotes. I don't know for the 3,900 others, I don't know their situation. And so I said, I don't have, I mean, I was asked how many of them are Christians. I don't know. I've heard that one is a Catholic priest. I'm pretty sure a number are Baptists. But I don't know. I don't know the percentage. I don't know the exact statistics.
Yeah. I want to talk about the point about asylum. So there has always been a way for people to apply for parole, and then that leads to political asylum. But recently, Trump administration has included up to 30 countries to temporarily pause the asylum application. So for TPS holders to go into a different status, that would be hindering the process as well.
Yeah, this is the double whammy that is hitting Burmese refugees from this Trump administration policy of trying to deport as many immigrants from the United States as possible. And so, yes, it's in what we're seeing and what we have seen since January 21st, 2025, when the Trump administration came in, we've seen this dramatic narrowing of the and just wholesale termination of programs to resettle people in the US. And that affected a number of Burmese refugees in Thailand and in Bangladesh who were all set. They had bought their air tickets and they were all set to be resettled in the US. But the Trump administration closed down that program and they were left stuck in Thailand, in Bangladesh. And they're still there. And so, this halting of political asylum claims, again, it's not directed at the Burmese. It's directed at all immigrants in the US. And the Burmese, like everybody else, are getting caught up in it.
Because of the TPS termination, I have seen some documents circulating that some groups are planning to file a lawsuit against the administration. Is it lawful for the administration to terminate abruptly in terms of TPS? And is it constitutional if the Congress if Congress and the other branches of the government are indicating, or other departments are understanding that the country like Myanmar still has ongoing civil war going on, still have human rights issues going on, that for the administration to terminate it like that and have the individuals be left stranded in a war-torn country or a third country with plans to, with the promise, with them believing that America is there to hold their hand and have faith in the friendship with the United States. For that, is it even constitutional for the United States to be abandoning these individuals?
There is a very strong case that this decision to terminate TPS by DHS is illegal there's also a good case to be made that it's also unconstitutional. So it's my understanding that there will be a case filed within the next few days with a number of Burmese TPS recipients as the plaintiffs. So that I strongly expect will happen. And that provides an opportunity, I think probably a slim opportunity, that a federal court could issue a stay in this termination. But as to the possibility of that actually happening, I'm not a lawyer, and I certainly, even though I've had a crash course in immigration law in this last 2 weeks, I am in no way an expert whatsoever on that. But I think it's a very slim hope. The other thing that we're doing on the political side is we're working with our friends in Congress around introducing a bill to restore temporary protected status for Burmese refugees. We're finalizing the language of that, and we're working to get, we hope, bipartisan co-sponsors for that bill. Again, amongst all of our friends in Congress, both Democratic and Republican. And so that is, Congress takes a lot of time to do anything. This is the legislative process. It does not move fast. In the slim chance that we could get this bill introduced in both the House and the Senate, and actually passed by the House and the Senate and sent to the president, I fully expect President Trump, I would say there's a 99% possibility that he would veto that. And I am also 99% certain that Congress would not have the votes to overturn that veto. However, there is another way of doing this, and this is what we did with the Burma Act. We actually didn't get the Burma Act as a freestanding bill through Congress. We got it through the House, but we didn't get it through the Senate. But what we did with the Burma Act was it was attached as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. And when the NDAA was passed, that's when we passed the Burma Act as this amendment to the NDAA. And so what we can do is once we have a bill introduced, then we will have language that could be attached as an amendment to a must-pass bill like an appropriations bill. And then that provision just becomes one of several amendments in that bill that the administration may not like, but because of their interest in passing and the president signing that bigger bill, whether it's an appropriations bill or whatever, then this restore TPS language in an amendment would just be one of many amendments that is the bitter pill wrapped around the bacon of this appropriations bill that President Trump would have to swallow and sign into law. So that's where we are. And I would say the timeline for that happening, that could take probably a year if everything goes well. And look how slow and look how dysfunctional the legislative and appropriations process is right now in Congress. So I would say that this is something that we're going to do, but I think with all of this Congress, Congress can put a lot of pressure on the administration on two things. Number one, they can put pressure on DHS to reverse its decision. And I would say at the outset of this, I think there was only 1% chance of that happening. Seeing the confusion and dysfunction at DHS that we have noticed in talking to at least one person at DHS since this decision was made to terminate TPS, I think that there is a lot of pressure on DHS, not just from Congress, but also from other parts of the administration. But I still think I still think that we have an incredibly tiny, slim chance to press DHS by the end of January to withdraw this termination. We are going to try because we have to. We're going to try because we will not leave behind the 4,000 Burmese refugees who are here in the US. We will not leave them behind. But I have no real optimism that we can succeed, although we will try our damnedest to do this. But the other thing that we want is we want to, if we can't get DHS to withdraw these false and misleading statements around the situation in Burma and this very damaging US policy towards Burma, which the junta is already praising. And as a sign, they are praising this, and the junta is telling the Burmese people that the US is recognizing the elections, the sham elections in Burma. And if we can't get the DHS to withdraw that or that language, we want to make sure that that language is contained at DHS and doesn't bleed over and affect overall US policy towards Burma. And so that's one of the things we've been saying to both the White House and the State Department. And there's a couple of specific things that we have in mind. Next month, January, President Trump needs to sign an executive order under the IEPA law, which is the underpinning of US sanctions on Burma, both on the junta and also on the scam centers. Now, under IEPA, IEEPA, and I think it's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. I always refer to IEPA, and I keep forgetting the order of the two E's. But anyway, under that law, the US, the president, can impose sanctions by executive order if he makes a determination that there is a threat to the national security of the United States. And so when President Clinton imposed a ban on new US investment in Burma that he imposed in 1997, under a lot of pressure from Congress, from Mitch McConnell and Linda Moynihan and others. When President Clinton, using IEPA, issued that executive order that banned new U.S. corporate investment in Burma, again, he had to make a determination that Burma posed a national security threat to the United States. So, when President Trump came into office earlier this year, in January of this year, he issued that executive order, made that statement that Burma posed a threat to the U.S. national security interests, and that is the underpinning of the sanctions we've seen. President Biden initially issued this executive order right after the coup. And so that was the basis for the sanctions that Biden imposed on Burma. And so after President Trump renewed this executive order in January of this year, that was the underpinning for the additional sanctions on the scam centers in Burma that the Trump administration has imposed, which we obviously like. So I put it to the White House when we had our meeting with them a week or so ago that we wanted to ensure that that executive order and those IEPA sanctions and that determination continues. Because, and as I put it to the White House, you want to continue sanctioning scam centers, right? that are actually hurting U.S. national security because these junta or these junta organized scam centers are ripping off Americans. So that's going to be a very telling point in January. Also, additionally, even though DHS says that it's safe for Burmese people to return to Burma, there is a State Department advisory for U.S. tourists that currently the U.S. State Department advises American tourists not to go to Burma because it is not safe, as we know. We want to make sure that the State Department reissues that policy. We also want to make sure that the characterization of the conditions in Burma by DHS do not bleed over into any State Department report on the human rights situation in Burma. But I have to say, one thing that happened or other didn't happen yesterday, which I think is kind of ominous. That is, yesterday on Human Rights Day, which last year was celebrated at the State Department, and Mong from the Chin Human Rights Organization received an award from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. I was there for the ceremony, and I was later with him as he visited members of Congress and so forth. Yesterday, there was no celebration of Human Rights Day at the State Department. And a number of missions, embassies in Burma, I think the Australians, the Canadians, the Swiss, a number of others, a number of embassies in Burma, Western country embassies, made statements about the human rights situation in Burma to mark Human Rights Day, and made very good statements about the sham elections and the overall situation on the ground. And what was notable by its absence was any statement by the U.S. Embassy in Myanmar. No statement. And that I find a little ominous right now. And I think it may well reflect that, as many of us know, that the administration is in the midst of a Burma policy review. And things are up in the air right now. And I think this is why this is just a very, very crucial moment for U.S. policy towards Burma. Because right now, U.S. foreign policy is undergoing a fundamental realignment with the issuance of this national security statement by the Trump administration, whereby the U.S. administration is announcing that it is no longer going to support democracy movements and is no longer going to support human rights around the world. And it's going to place U.S. national security and also U.S. commercial interests ahead of any concern for democracy and human rights around the world. And it includes statements along the lines of, we're not going to comment on the state of democracy in other countries because our relationship with foreign countries is one of talking with them about U.S. national security interests and US commercial interests. And that's it. So I think we're in a very dangerous and unpredictable time right now, not just for US policy towards Burma, but US foreign policy in total. And then once again, in this US administration-led realignment of foreign policy, again, this is not specific to Burma, but Burma and the Burmese people are getting caught up in this political drama that's unfolding here in the US. And so I think, we need to continue to, and we're going to continue to work with our friends in the administration and to work with our friends in Congress to influence this and to maintain a US policy towards Burma that prioritizes the needs and the wishes of the Burmese people and supports them in their struggle against the junta. But make no mistake, we are in a very unpredictable and very dangerous time right now for US policy towards Burma and just US foreign policy in general. And I think it's incumbent on journalists like yourself to look into this, report on this. Democracy requires sunlight, the kind of sunlight that excellent reporters like yourself shine on the operations of government. And so, I commend you for this podcast and all the other Inside Myanmar podcasts. You are shedding incredible light on what's going on here in Washington. And that is very powerful. As they always say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so I commend you for that. And for our part, those of us who are advocates for human rights, advocates for democracy, we're going to continue to organize, build power amongst with the Burmese people and all friends of Burma like myself to mobilize that power, build that power, and direct that power to changing U.S. foreign policy towards Burma and also the policy of other governments towards Burma. And also we're going to continue to, as always, put market-based pressure, consumer pressure, shareholder pressure, and media pressure on corporations that support the junta and corporations that are complicit in human rights abuses in Burma. So we're going to continue to do our jobs. I commend you, E, for doing your job extremely well as a journalist. I commend Insight Myanmar for this series. And this is all that we can do, and we're going to do it to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Simon. And, on Inside Myanmar, we try to amplify the voices that need to be heard. And you have unpacked a lot of different, behind the scene things working off the Congress, and I want to talk about that a bit later on. But before I go into that, I want to highlight the point that you said about how Burma policy is under review right now, and including other foreign policy in the U.S. administration. And I was wondering is this the beginning of the series of unfortunate event in starting with the TPS, and where is it going to lead? And I'm thinking out loud, I'm wondering, is there going to be more worse news? And it is terrifying and sad right now, but what's even more hurtful is that, it seems like Burma or Myanmar nationals who are seeking for refuge in America are like people who are drowning and hoping for a friend to lend a hand. And right now I feel I can't help but feel emotional and feeling abandoned by the U.S. policy, and even sadder that Burma is not even the point of contact, like the point. It's not even the target. We are just collateral damage. I don't know if that's even better. It's like saying you don't even matter enough to be the target of this action that we just decided flippantly. So, forgive me that I'm a little bit frustrated. And from then on, I want to see what do you think this is leading to? Is TPS and the temporary suspension of the asylum is the beginning of the, what's to come next? Are we to brace ourselves for more change in Burma policy?
Well, I think, I totally feel your sense of abandonment. And yes, it is true. The reason why you feel abandoned by the US government is because the US government is abandoning the Burmese, it's abandoning the Ukrainians, it's abandoning the Venezuelans, it's abandoning everyone. And yeah, the Burmese are caught up in this as collateral damage in this realignment of U.S. foreign policy by the Trump administration. And we've seen this the entire year. We've seen the utter destruction of U.S. soft power by this administration. We have seen the Burmese get caught up in the destruction of USAID, the destruction of Voice of America, the destruction of Radio Free Asia, the enormous damage done to the National Endowment for Democracy, the U.S. Institute for Peace, the Woodrow Wilson Center, all of these vital institutions of U.S. soft power just swept away and destroyed and thrown away by this administration. And 30 years that we have spent building up Burma programs at VOA, Radio Free Asia, ADD, USAID, all that work that we spent building up those programs, working with Congress to appropriate money for it, all the Burmese civil society groups working with NED, USAID, so on and so forth, all that was trashed by an administration with this bizarre, misguided need to destroy U.S. soft power for whatever reason. And so, yeah, you feel abandoned. Burmese people feel abandoned because you have been abandoned by this administration. That's a very valid feeling because it represents the truth of your situation. All I can say is this, is those of us in civil society groups like Campaign for a New Myanmar, many, many others that we work with who have been honored and proud to work with the Burmese people and raise up Burmese voices and in the corridors of power here in Washington, D.C. and in other capitals. We will never abandon you. We will never abandon the Burmese people. And, I've dedicated 30 years of my life doing this, and I ain't stopping. And I know all the people I work with are not going to stop. And so we will never abandon you, and we will continue to do everything we possibly can to support you. And I know, one thing I know is, I've worked with multiple administrations and multiple Congresses, Democrats, Republicans. We've always found a way to work with any administration. And this administration is no different. There are people that we can work with in this administration, and we're actively working with them right now to change this. But, we will endure. We are not going away. The Burmese people are not going away. This administration is going away. like all administrations, go away. And so our job now is to endure this, to fight back, to mitigate, to change, to improve. And as tough as the going may be right now, I am sure that in the next Congress, and I think in the next administration, because of the work that we are doing now, we will be able to reap dividends when we have a different president and when we have a different Congress.
Thank you for your words of assurance. That makes me feel a little better. And I guess we just need to endure 3 more years and fight along within this administration. And, you as the director for the Campaign for a New Myanmar has been lobbying Congress to take pro-democracy actions on Burma policy. I assume at the same time, your counterparts or we can call it your counterparts, the lobbying firms working for the junta are probably working on a change in Burma policy in favor of them. Do you know who they are or what they're doing, and if they have any influence on this recent change in Burma policy?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the DCI group, which is a Republican-aligned lobbying firm, and also McCohen is another one. I think there's a third one as well. I mean, these lobbying firms, they're very slimy. They operate in the shadows. You don't see much evidence of them. I was in a senator's office about a month or so ago, talking to a staffer who worked on foreign policy, and he said, "Oh yeah, I had a meeting with this lobbyist. We talked about a bunch of other issues that his firm was lobbying on. And then towards the end of the conversation, he said, oh, yeah, by the way, we're also registered lobbyists for the Burmese government right now." And he said, he said to this lobbyist, "And you throw that in at an end of a conversation, the fact that you're lobbying for this junta?" That's the kind of slimy way that they operate. They'll go into these offices. They have other clients. They'll talk about that stuff, but they won't. When they secure the meeting, they don't say that they're going to be bringing up their contract with the Myanmar junta. They'll talk about other things, then they'll throw it in at the end. That's one evidence that I've seen. But I think that shows how congressional officers, congressional staff, members of Congress, they know that these lobbying firms are full of shit. If I can say that on this podcast. And this staffer was not impressed. And this is a staffer for a senator who's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So what I think is that the junta thinks they have more influence in Washington than they actually have. And I think they're being overconfident. They are touting this DHS policy. They touted the letter that President Trump sent to the junta about tariffs. And they're touting this as, see, Burmese people, we have a relationship with the U.S. government. We can influence the U.S. government. We've spent millions on these lobbying firms. Don't think you Burmese people, don't think that you are the only ones who can talk to the U.S. government. We can too. And it's true. They can talk to the administration, and they've definitely been doing that. That $3 million that they gave to DCI Group, that's generated a number of billable hours for DCI Group and a number of meetings. And so, but I think that the junta is wrong when it takes credit, and it has been taking public credit for the DHS statement and the statement about the sham elections. And I think that's a fundamental mistake, because DHS made that statement, not because they think that there are free and fair elections in Burma. They didn't talk about the ceasefires because they think the ceasefires are real. DHS simply doesn't care about the situation in Burma. They made those false and misleading statements just to underpin legally their policy of terminating TPS for Burma. That's the only reason that statement was made. And we're not seeing any influence on Congress by the junta and its lobbying lackeys. In the recent hearing on Burma, where you had Lucky Karim, Steve Ross, and Kelly Curry giving testimony, you listen to the statements made by members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and their questions of the people who testified. And I would recommend everyone to go and watch the full hearing if you want to understand where Congress stands on Burma. Every statement, every question was supportive of the Burmese people and was opposed to the military junta. And afterwards, the subcommittee chairs who hosted that hearing, both Democratic and Republican, Billenness, Young Kim, Kamlaga Dove, and also Amy Berra, they put out a joint bipartisan statement labeling the sham elections as the sham that they are. You have also seen the Congressional Burma Caucus co-chairs, Republican Billenness, Democratic Betty McCollum, put out a statement saying that the administration must reverse its decision to terminate TPS for Burma. And again, saying very clearly, in contradiction to the DHS statement, that Burma is not safe for Burmese people to return. We've seen similar statements from senators as well. And I put that to you as proof that, and also in addition to this, we've seen bills on Burma, the No New Funds for Burma bill, the Brave Burma Act, the Burma Genocide Accountability and Protection Act, and also the Representative Jefferson Shreve's bill on dismantling the scam centers. These bills have gone through committee, and in the case of the scam center bill, in the case of the No New Funds for Burma bill, these have passed committee or passed the House unanimously or overwhelmingly with only a handful of votes against. That shows exactly where Congress stands. And it stands in support of the Burmese people. And that is going to continue to put this continual pressure from Congress on the administration not to roll back all of the administration's support, going back several administrations, for the Burmese people and in terms of putting pressure on the junta. So, yeah, I am, based on the evidence of what we have seen from Congress in terms of votes, in terms of statements, in terms of and so forth, it is really unanimous support for the Burmese people. I don't think any amount of high-priced lobbying can change that. And the fact that this has happened months into these supposed lobbying campaigns by DCI Group, by McCohen, I think that is clear evidence that the junta's lobbying and the lobbying by their lobbying lackey firms is falling flat in Congress. And I think it's also falling flat with the administration.
In your previous episode with the Inside Myanmar as well, you went into details about how the Burma Act was passed and the role of Burma Caucus, which is a Burma issue being the bipartisan effort. And, so for listeners who want to know more about the details on that, I recommend you listen to the first episode. But on going off on the topic of Congress, so you're saying that there seems to be no influence on Congress by the junta's lobbying firm as of right now. And the statements that you were referring that come out are from the co-chairs of the Burma Caucus, the co-sponsors that been pushing on Congress regarding Burma policy as a unanimous issue. And but I want to ask you that, right now Republican has a majority in both House and Senate. In other words, it's like both upper and lower chamber of Congress. So in Burmese, that would be like Atelador, and both Aulador and Telador have Republican majority. So how is it working under this current administration for the Congress to be working in this Republican majority for both chambers? And how is that different from Trump 1? And honestly, how is it even comparable to any former Republican majority times? Because right now it's MAGA, Make America Great Again, a Republican, and Trump administration, which I see some kind of difference from Trump 1 and Trump 2. But I want to know, how is it different working with Congress under this Trump administration compared to previous Trump administration, and also compared to previous other Republican administrations?
Well, I put it to you. I mean, I've always been asked who was the best Republican who was the best president who took the best action on Burma, and I say, as someone who regards themselves as a progressive Democrat, I can say without a doubt that the best president on Burma was George W. Bush. At a time that we needed pressure on the junta, he provided that pressure. And it was a Republican Congress in 2003 that passed the Burma Freedom and Democracy Act, signed into law by President George W. Bush. And then Congress in 2008 passed the Jade Act, again, also signed into law by George W. Bush. And so we've always worked with both Republicans and Democrats, whether in Congress or whether the administration. It should be noted that under Trump 1, the Trump administration, after the brutal attacks and the genocide on the Rohingya in August of 2017, that was when President Trump turned around the previous policy by the Obama administration that dropped all the sanctions on the Burmese military junta. And you saw under Trump 1 the beginnings of a turnaround and imposition of sanctions on Burmese junta leaders. And I remember like in early 2000, we were exploring the use of global Magnitsky Act sanctions against junta-owned companies like MEHL and MEC, which were later sanctioned by President Biden. So it should be noted that under Trump 1, that U.S. policy switched from essentially working with the Myanmar army, the Tatmadaw, and switch to sanctions. It should be noted that after August 2017, in the fall, there was a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act that would have renewed U.S. military-to-military assistance to the Burmese army. This would be a military-to-military aid, or MIL-MIL as it's called. And this was in the National Defense Authorization Act. And it was in a provision that had actually been put into that by Senator John McCain, who is, a big friend of Burma, but it was in line with the attempts after the opening up in Burma after the 2015 elections and the hybrid military-civilian government under the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi. And so there was a policy of accommodation with the Tatmadaw that included not just the dropping of sanctions, but also this attempt to resume military-to-military aid. But because of the genocidal attacks against the Rohingya that drove over 700,000 Rohingya into Burma, and I think that represented a premonition of what the Tatmadaw was prepared to do. Because by doing this against the Rohingya, they were making it very clear that they would do this against other ethnic minorities, and they would do this against the Burman majority too, if they felt the need to. And they did in February 2021, right? So we did a big campaign of pressure to get that military-to-military provision taken out of the National Defense Authorization Act, and we succeeded. We managed to convince Senator McCain, who was the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, that was the floor manager for that bill. Senator McCain went onto the floor of the US Senate, and he removed his own provision for military-to-military aid from that bill because of the attacks on the Rohingya. That is how much power we have. And, I think this is something that needs to be examined, because the period from August 2017 through to February 1st, 2021, I was very active in, through my other project, the International Campaign for the Rohingya. And I was very active in continuing to put all this pressure on the junta and put pressure on Japanese beer giant Kirin to end its joint venture with MEHL in the Myanmar Mandalay beer factory. We put successful pressure on Western Union to drop a junta-controlled bank from one of the banks that it had business agreements with in Burma to offer Western Union services. We managed to do that through consumer pressure and a shareholder resolution, shareholder pressure against Western Union, and they dropped that junta-owned bank. That happened in, I believe, like 2019. Either 2019 or early 2020. So, all this pressure on the junta is building on all the pressure by Congress and the administration that was put on the army before they did the coup. And that's why there's so much support in Congress, because Representative Meeks, the sponsor of the Brave Burma Act, Senator Jeff Merkley, who's been underpinning, and also Senator Cardin, who were underpinning the work in the Senate, they, before the coup, were active in supporting the Rohingya in their struggle to get accountability from the junta, from the army at that point, for the genocide against them. And so I think that piece of history needs to be noted and needs to be understood, because that is the period where we it was from August 2017, that's when we started turning back US policy and moving it away from accommodation with the military to putting pressure on the military for its genocide of the Rohingya and its other human rights abuses that it was doing in Kachin state and other ethnic states. So yes, it's. I mean, that's what we were doing during Trump 1. I mean, that was your original question.
Yeah.
What was happening during Trump 1? That's what was happening. Was Tatmadaw leaders were being sanctioned by the U.S.
So that's how it's different in Trump 2. And so you talk about the bills, and also in your previous episode, you talk about the 3 bills, specifically the Brave Burma Act, Rohingya Gap Act, and No New Funds for Burma, those bills. And you said that those are unanimously passed in-house.
Well, it should be noted that it's now the Burma Gap Act. It's now the Burma Genocide Accountability Protection Act. In the previous session, it was the Rohingya Genocide Accountability Protection Act, but now it is the Burma Genocide Accountability Protection Act because the language was rewritten to be more inclusive of other ethnic minorities in Burma.
Thank you for the update. Yeah, that's very helpful in terms of building context for that. So, with the bills, obviously got a lot of support in-house, and then they were introduced, and also some of them are passed in Senate as well. And you mentioned late Senator John McCain. Of course, around that time there were the strong figures of and champions of Burma. And, right now, probably what's left is like Senator Mitch McConnell, but he is probably close to retiring as well. He is a good friend of Burma. And I know that you mentioned in the previous episode too, these notable people on Burma policy in Congress who are constantly pushing for a bipartisan effort on Burma issue. With that, I want to talk about the new bill that you mentioned earlier on that you are trying to introduce regarding the TPS. Can you tell us more about it? And if it were to introduce, and you said if it all goes well, it will take 1 year, but it's in comparison to other bills that we have known. Can you compare it and put it in a simple, short terms for us and our listeners to get a clear understanding of? Because I know that like Congress is very complicated. You've been working on it for a year, so it seems intuitive to you, but put in simple terms, what would it take, and what's the best outcome we can hope for?
Again, just to put this in context, if a bill passes Congress in a year, it has moved very fast. That is fast.
That is 1 year is fast.
That is like the most optimistic, shortest time it takes to get a bill passed.
It's like snap, like effective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, normally bills, they take several years to get passed.
Oh, wow.
You have to you introduce a bill first, and you start to build up support for it in Congress. It doesn't pass that congressional session, but in 2 years, you then come back with the bill, and you build on that base of support, and you build that support higher. The Brave Burma Act was introduced in the last Congress. It never came up for a committee vote in the House Financial Services Committee. It only came up for a vote in the House Financial Services Committee in this Congress this year. So you can see, with the Brave Burma Act, it was first introduced, but it never even made it to a committee hearing. But in this new session, it was introduced early in the session, and it did, in fact, go through the House Financial Services Committee by unanimous vote. That shows how you build power, but that has taken more than a year.
Wow.
And we still haven't gotten this introduced in the Senate yet.
So it still needs to be passed to Senate and for it to become law.
Yes. You have to get a bill through the House. then you have to get a bill through the House and the Senate. And if the bills have any difference in language in the House and the Senate, then they have to be reconciled by a House and Senate joint committee, who then reconcile the language in the two bills, make it into one bill. Then it goes back to the House and back to the Senate to be passed again in its reconciled, identical form. And only if it passes both the House and the Senate in the same form, then it goes to the president's desk for signature.
Even then, the president has all the power to whether to pass or not, right?
The president can veto the bill. If the president vetoes the bill, then a 2/3 majority of both the House and the Senate have to vote to overturn that veto.
Oh, so there is still a chance to overturn that veto, but 2/3 of the House and Senate need to agree on that.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you for the comprehensive explanation. I think that put us in a more clearer idea. And I want to highlight back to what you said in the previous episode about, I guess I'm paraphrasing, but more or less the same quote that you were saying, that Congress is appropriating money for Burma, but the U.S. administration is not spending it. For example, the closing of the USAID or the humanitarian funds that are not being used. With this quote-unquote impoundment of money on Burma that is not being spent, is it even constitutional? Can they even do that? And that's my first thought. And then leading on to that, from there, I might sound a bit cynical since, we were talking about a lot of dreary facts and the prospect of it not being so great. But the U.S. policy on Burma, or I guess lack thereof, there's a lot of frustration. So is there even a point in lobbying in Congress if the administration is going to ignore the Congress carefully suggested suggestion? I mean, these are not to be taken lightly. Congress really put a lot of thought and, push onto what is to be spent, what is to be done. And for you as somebody who work constantly with Congress, what is the next step forward in terms of what the Congress has the ability to do under this kind of political climate? Is Congress losing power to the administration?
Right. Well, what we're doing here, and what I've done for 30 years, is to change U.S. foreign policy and to influence U.S. foreign policy, and to make sure that U.S. foreign policy in Burma is one that is supporting the Burmese people in their struggle against the military. That's it. And so what we've been doing, the type of U.S. policy that we have been seeking and succeeding in obtaining, is pressure on the military or on the junta through the use of sanctions and through the use of political pressure by the administration. And number two, support for the Burmese people, Burmese civil society. Again, political support, but also financial support. Again, through Congress funding all of this U.S. soft power, USAID, State Department grants, Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, U.S. Institute for Peace, and so forth. Now, again, with this destruction by this administration of U.S. soft power, what we're seeing is that, as you said, Congress has appropriated money for USAID and other NED, other programs, and the administration has refused to spend it. The administration has sent rescission bills to Congress, and those are bills where Congress approves this administration's decision not to spend that money. Okay. But not all of these cuts, not all of these refusals to spend money have been done through the rescission process. In many cases, the administration has simply not spent the money as Congress has directed the administration to spend the money. And that is what's called impoundment. Impoundment under the Impoundment Act that was passed by Congress, impoundment is illegal. It may also be unconstitutional. And those are the questions that are currently being adjudicated in federal courts. But yes, I mean, we are actually still awaiting the Senate version of the State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. It is much delayed. There is a House version that we don't like because it contains very little money for Burma-related programs. When we last had a State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill, which was, 2 years ago now, these bills are supposed to be annual. This is just an indication of how fundamentally broken the appropriations process is in Congress right now. But when we last had a State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill, there was a House version and there was a Senate version. The House version had $50 million for Burma-related programs, and the language wasn't as good. The Senate version had over $130 million for Burma-related programs and had much better language requiring the administration to spend that money in ways that were supportive of the Burmese people. And when those two different appropriations bills, House and Senate, came up for reconciliation by what's called the Big Four appropriators, that is the chair and the ranking member of both the House and Senate appropriations committees. At the time, it was, I think, Susan Collins, Patty Murray, and Rosa DeLauro on the House side, ranking Democrat, and Kay Granger, now retired, the Republican chair of the House Appropriations Committee. And what happens in the reconciliation? This is what I learned. In this process, I got a crash course in how appropriations work. So I learned this process, and so what we wanted and what we campaigned for was we wanted the Senate language. We did not want the House language. We wanted the Senate language on Burma-related programs because there was more money and the language was better. And so we organized lobbying of Congress, members of Congress, to tell these Big Four appropriators, Senator Collins, Senator Murray, Representative DeLauro, Representative Granger. We went to them with a very simple message. We want the Senate language, not the House language. So that we're getting to the point where they actually have in a room these two senators and these two representatives, the Big Four, in a room, and they're going down the appropriations bill, reconciling, and they go down it section by section. And what we wanted was when they came to the Burma-related programs, we wanted them to agree that, yeah, we'll go with the Senate version on this. All we wanted was a 15-second conversation where they basically agreed, okay, Burma-related programs, yeah, we'll give that one to the Senate. Next, let's now do Cambodia. That's all we wanted. And we got that. And I mean, we worked with the American Baptist Church. The American Baptist Church got, I think, 20 Baptist ministers, some Burmese, some non-Burmese. They wrote to Representative Kay Granger, who was from Texas, and they said, we want the Senate language. We don't want the House language. We also reached out. Again, the American Baptists did a wonderful meeting where they had pastors from Washington State. They sat down with the staff of Patty Murray, again, with the same message. We were all really on message. We want the Senate version. We don't want the House version. And we got that. We won that. And it was because we campaigned for it. But yes, that was when the appropriations process was working. It's not now. I mean, we're not seeing appropriations bills being passed. We're seeing all the appropriations bills being lumped into one continuing resolution that expires in like 6 months, and they kick the can down the road another couple of months. I mean, the last continuing resolution, they kicked the can on the budget down to, I think, January, so they don't have to deal with this before Christmas. This is the mess that we're in. And we're still lacking a number of appropriations bills. As I said, we do not have yet a Senate version of the state and foreign operations appropriations bill. I asked, when we're going to see that? I talked to actual Senate offices where the senator is on the appropriations committee, and they say, we don't know. We don't know when we're going to see that.
Wow, that's I'm speechless in this process and how it's being done.
Yeah, but rest assured, we continue to. We recently organized a constituent meeting with the staff of Senator Rosa DeLauro, who is the ranking Democrat on the House State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee that draws up the House version of the State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill, which funds the State Department. We are also in close touch with the Republican clerk in the Senate, Paul Grove, who is a longtime friend of Burma. And I think the man, he worked for Senator McConnell. Senator McConnell, his voice on foreign policy was mainly his role as a member of the Senate State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee. His first bill for sanctions on Burma back in 1996. His first bill with Moynihan for sanctions, that was attached as an amendment to the State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. That was congressional pressure that led in 97 to President Clinton, by executive order, putting a ban on new investment in Burma by U.S. companies, again, using IEPA and doing it by executive order. So, again, kind of long story short, in all of this work, whether it's pushing for sanctions bills in Congress, whether it's pushing for appropriations by Congress, and whether it's working with the administration to actually do this by executive action and by actually spending the money that Congress appropriates. The one thing I've learned in 30 years of doing this work is that if you want to influence the U.S. administration, any administration, the best form of pressure on the administration to do what you want is through pressure from Congress. And it's Congress using its power to legislate. It's Congress using its power to appropriate. It's Congress using its power for oversight. When they bring in the Secretary of State and they ask them tough questions on Burma, when they bring in the Treasury Secretary. Remember when Secretary Yellen, a couple of years, like last year, she was questioned by Representative Bill Hazenga at our House Financial Services Committee meeting. And Representative Bill Hazenga, and he sent that video around quite widely. There was Representative Bill Hazenga exercising congressional oversight. He asked Secretary Yellen specifically. He cited the Burmese community in Battle Creek, Michigan, in his district, which he always does. He cited his role as co-chair on the Burma caucus, and he asked Secretary Yellen, what is the Treasury Secretary doing to ensure that the U.S. follows through with sanctions on Myanmar Economic Bank. That is the power of oversight. That's congressional pressure right there in that video through the oversight process. So yeah, I mean, you know, for 30 years I've had people coming to me saying, we want the president, we want the administration to do these things on Burma. And I said, well, yeah, we should definitely petition the president. We should definitely have meetings with State Department, with Treasury Department, with the White House. But you can have meetings with the White House, but you know, you can have meetings which have power behind them, and you can have meetings that have no power behind them. And if we as advocates have a meeting at the White House and have a meeting with the State Department, and we have the power of Congress behind us, when we have, for instance, the Brave Burma Act passing committee that would put pressure on the administration to put sanctions on Myanmar Economic Bank, the fact that that bill has passed through the committee, when we sit down with the State Department, when we sit down with Treasury, we can point to that congressional pressure. And that puts more power behind our ask for those sanctions, because Congress is asking for it too. And Congress is progressing with a bill that would put into law that pressure from Congress. So yeah, the best way to influence the U.S. president, the U.S. administration, is through organizing pressure through Congress. And we can do that because Congress listens to us, because we're voters. And, you know, I've just seen in the last week constituent meetings. I saw there was a constituent meeting. The Burmese community last Friday sat down with Representative Jefferson Shreve. And Representative Jefferson Shreve has one of the largest Burmese communities in his district of any House member.
In Indiana, right?
Indiana, yes. Or as they call it sometimes, Chindiana, right?
A lot of Burmese community in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Indeed. And, you know, after the decision by DHS to terminate TPS for Burma, I sat down with Representative Jefferson Shreve's aide, and it was a good low-key meeting. And I said, Representative Jefferson Shreve needs to meet with the Burmese community and talk about this and listen to their concerns. And that's precisely what he did. Why did he do that? Because the Burmese community in his district are large and constitute a voting bloc that he needs to listen to. It's the same for Representative Billenness, who's facing probably a very tough race in the midterm elections. Representative Billenness needs the votes of the Burmese community if he's going to win that race, particularly if it's going to be a good year for Democrats. His seat is amongst the Republican seats that are vulnerable to a big blue wave of Democratic support, which we are seeing all across the country, and the Republicans are expecting. Representative Billenness needs their votes in the general election. And so I know his office has been speaking very closely with the Burmese community in his district. And so, yes, you know, what we've been seeing over the last 30 years is the Burmese community, and also friends of the Burmese community, you know, people like me who just have this weird obsession with helping the Burmese people for the last 30 years. I don't know. Anyway, but a lot of us around, you know, fortunately, I guess. But, you know, in the last 30 years, we have really built up the base of supporters and organized the base of supporters around the country. On the Campaign for New Myanmar email list, we have close to 20,000 people in the US who in their hundreds and in their thousands, contact their members of Congress every month and ask them to pass bills, ask them to support appropriations, ask them to, right now, asking them to contact the Department of Homeland Security and oppose this termination of TPS for Burma. And members of Congress are doing that because they're hearing from voters. They're not just hearing from lobbyists like me who live on Capitol Hill who can just walk down to any congressional office in 20 minutes if I walk fast and could be there in person. They're also listening to their constituents when they send emails, when they make phone calls, when they organize Zoom meetings from the district. And, we organize those and we encourage those and we help our supporters to make their voice heard with members of Congress with as much power as they possibly can. Sometimes I go into a congressional office. In the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't actually say this, but in the back of my mind, I'm like saying to this congressional staffer, look, we want you to do this. Do you want to do this the easy way? Or do you want to do this the hard way? Do you want to do this the easy way? Do you want to support this bill, co-sponsor this bill because we had this meeting and you think it's a good bill and just my meeting with you alone is enough to convince you? Because that's the easy way. The hard way is if I go to the 100 people in your district on our email list and I tell them and I make it easy for them to contact you with phone calls, emails, Zoom meetings, and you have to, does it take me organizing or working with the community in your district to actually have a meeting between you and actual voters? That's the harder one. I mean, I'd rather they do this the easy way. It's so much less time, but we can do it the hard way too, if that's what's needed.
Yeah. That also it's a pointer for our listeners too, who are of voting age in the United States. And if they want to be friends of Burma and see change, they can talk to their congressmen, congresswomen, and put pressure on it as voters, as constituents of each state. So to our listeners who want to see change in Burma policy and, asking us what they can do to help Burma, this is one way we can do. And from that, I want to.
And actually, I would also say I would hope that in the webpage with the link to this interview, you also include a link to our website at Campaign for a New Myanmar. It's newmyanmar.org. It's very easy to find. And if you go on that website, you will find actions that you can take where you simply put in your address and it will send a message directly to your members of Congress, your representative and your senators, based on what the address that you put in. And we have these online actions where you can send a message directly to your members of Congress to ask them to co-sponsor a bill or to speak up in support of TPS for Burma. We have those actions on our website at newmyanmar.org. And when you take that action, you not only get added to our email list so that you get weekly updates on actions you can take, also you'll get a thank you email, which will contain a link to a online spreadsheet with the names, phone numbers, and emails of congressional staffers to every House member and every senator, and to give you sample language that you can put in an email directly to those staffers. And you'll give you a phone number where you can call up, ask for that staffer by name, and ask to speak to them, and ask to set up a meeting with the member of Congress in the district or over Zoom. And so you can follow up, and we create a ladder of engagement for people so that you can start by taking this online action and sending a message that goes directly to your members of Congress. But We also make it easy for you to follow it up with a phone call. We give us a sample script of an email, the sample script of a phone message that you can leave. And we have, as I said, we have hundreds of people taking these actions every week. And that's why we're getting these bills through Congress unanimously or overwhelmingly. But anyone who wants to know, what can I do? Well, if you live in the US, you can contact your members of Congress. That is effective. That works. We have tools to make it easy for you to do that, and for you to do that in a way that has the most impact and has the most power.
Thanks for adding that. And it is going to be very useful for our listeners. And to even have that set up as a tool, it's so powerful and has a leg up in doing this as an individual.
Indeed.
And my last point, which probably leads to a question, is the point about DHS using the language in the statement in terminating the TPS. It says because there has been improvements in governance and stability there, which is referring to the upcoming elections, which is starting on December 28th and onward. But I have talked to a lot of people who are who currently lives in the country and who are in Thailand, and also people close to working on Myanmar issues, and journalists who are constantly on the move to cover Myanmar issue. And one of the journalists said that this is likely to be one of the most violent election in the history of Myanmar, tragically. So with that notion, and also we have talked about the jarring in reality between the language that DHS used and then the State Department travel advisory against Americans going to Myanmar. So, I'm reiterating my doubts about whether there is misengagement between agency in the United States administration. And, another thing that I want to point out or highlight is that, President Trump is a businessman and he is looking at things in capitalist way. So our argument for the United States to care or take actions for countries like Myanmar or to care about human rights issue is that because it is the right thing to do. So when the argument about, do things because you're a superpower country as United States and because it is the right thing to do to provide, sanctuary, a refuge for people who are in need, people from war-torn country to seek refuge in your country. That is the argument that we have been making in previous administration. But, it may seem to President Trump that the refugees or TPS holders or people who are from, not my language, but like his, in some ways, it's like shithole countries, are being seen as mooches or are weighing down on the United States' progress or are nuisance to the American citizens, American society. That has seemed to be the narrative that has been going on, which is leading to, I assume, different changes in Burma policy, and including other countries like Venezuela, Sudan, all of that. And, this, on one hand, there is a junta who has rumored to have people pitch to the President Trump that there is much to be gained from Myanmar by working with them. That is in terms of rare earth, in terms of what they can gain by working with the junta in a country with natural resources. And on the other hand, having the Myanmar nationals that are currently in the United States, the 4,000 that are TPS holders and another 10,000 who are under temporary asylum application, seem to be wearing them down. So to President Trump, is it a gain versus a loss? Is it a gain by working with the junta or a loss by working with these refugees? So my question is that, is there a way we can change that narrative? Is this a PR battle in presenting a model refugee who is benefiting America? Because you mentioned, Simon, that like earlier on, these are the best of the best people who come to America and then contributing to the American society. But if President Trump or the administration have any other idea, is there a narrative that we can bring about that will make a capitalist argument sense in arguing for these Burmese nationals, but not for the junta?
Yeah, and I think you are completely correct. This is a PR battle. This is a battle of narratives, and I think you've really outlined the battling narratives right there. And I think what we need to continue to push is our narrative, and that is a narrative that is based on fact. That is a narrative that is true. The Burmese refugees who are here under TPS represent some of the best and the brightest people from Burma. They are already contributing significantly to the US in their work, and they were here to study. They were here to be active professionals, adding to whatever country, whatever society they're living in. These are people who want to build up and want to succeed. And these are also people who are very aligned with the US's values of democracy, of human rights, of social justice, of religious freedom. So these are people, who are no different from the other immigrants who've come here from Burma. I'm talking about the Burmese community that built up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The Burmese community in Fort Wayne has rebuilt that city. They have rebuilt the economic and social life of the city of Fort Wayne, Indiana. That has been a huge benefit, not just to Fort Wayne, but to the state of Indiana, to the country. These are the kind of immigrants who built America. And so that's the narrative that we are putting across, and we're putting across every day. And more importantly, that is the narrative that is being supported by the Burmese and the Burmese American community, who every day get up in the morning, go to school, go to work, go to church, go to their temple, go to their mosque, and build up the entire fabric of American society, just like so many other immigrants have done, perhaps myself included, and you too, E. but I think we also have truth on our side in other ways. We can point out that it makes no sense working with the junta to go after the scam centers. The scam centers are in parts of the country that are under the control of the junta and have been protected by the junta. Just as the junta is holding sham elections, just as the junta is promoting its sham ceasefires, the junta is now pushing this sham crackdown on the scam centers that they have supported, that they continue to support. It is the sham trifecta that the junta is putting across right now, that they are the ones to deal with the scam centers. They are the ones who can hold free and fair elections. They're the ones who are promoting peace. When the new local governments, like the ones in Krenny State, that the DHS is citing as a source of stability, but ignoring the fact that the junta is weekly bombing in Karenni State and other areas where they no longer have control, and local people are building up these local administrations. You know, the DHS never mentions the airstrikes on these local administrations and these local communities that they're touting as signs of peace, because they're not peaceful. They're under constant airstrikes by the junta. And the rare earths, even there. The junta doesn't control the rare earths. The Kachins do. You know, you can't deal with the junta on the rare earths. I mean, the only way you could do a deal with the junta on the rare earths is if you give the junta a whole bunch of military support that might possibly dislodge the Kachins from the rare earths area. But wait, are you going to do that? Or are you going to sit down with the Kachins and cut a deal with them? I mean, if US really wants the rare earths and the US wants a deal, they have to deal with the Kachin. They can't deal with the junta to get those. So yeah, there's some false narratives here. And I think our narratives, which are based on truth, will prevail. And they will prevail not just because they're true, because that does help, but because we're going to continue to put incredible power behind them through our advocacy and through getting our friends in Congress, through their bills, through their appropriations, through their oversight, to bolster that narrative and put power behind that narrative, so it makes it very clear to the administration which narrative is real and what is indeed the best way forward for US policy towards Burma in a way that indeed supports US national security interests. It does make Burma down the road, when it's right, a good place for US corporate investment. And it's also in alignment with American values of democracy, human rights, and freedom. We can win this narrative, and we will, this battle of narratives, and we win this battle of narratives by putting more power behind our narrative so that it is both powerful and it is true.
Yeah, the place of birth is probably the least interesting fact about somebody. And it is just so boring to put this much emphasis on a person's individual's place of birth and to be judged based on that. And that is just, you know, not just for immigrants and refugees, but it is purely by chance that you are born in a country, whether they will protect you in times of war or civil war or not. So this, I would, in my personal opinion, that's the most boring argument that the administration is making. And on to the topic of scam centers, you know, I want to point out that the scam centers are directly impacting the lives of the U.S. citizens, and actually, the scam centers are the product of the conflict, a product of the instability. It is a breeding ground for these quote unquote lawless states to hone into these scam centers, which enable them to target vulnerable communities like older people, terminally ill people in America who are curious, or like technologically inept people, just regular American citizens are being scammed left, right, and center. And you know, Simon, you probably get a lot of scam calls yes, in the United States. And that's from our part of the world. So those things, I think it's in the President Trump's interest to tackle them. But for it to resolve on its own, that is not the root of the disease, but it's symptoms that comes out from it. Like the root of the disease is the instability in the country. And just because DHS says there is improvement, quote unquote, improvement in governance and stability, doesn't mean that it has happened already. Mm-hmm. So I do not have a question, but I want to end on a note that for, you know, since we're seeking a remedy on this issue, it is best to tackle the root cause of the problem, which is, the instability and the civil war violence and civil war that is currently going on in Burma?
I think what's very clear is the root cause of almost all of Burma's problems is the Burmese military. That's the root cause. Anything that doesn't remove the military from political power, anything that doesn't remove the military from economic power, anything that doesn't return the Myanmar military to its barracks and put under firm civilian control, or just abolish the military as it currently exists and completely destroy it. Nothing is going to be solved in Burma until the military is out of the picture. And so you can't work with the military to improve the crisis that they created for their own power and their own profit.
Thank you for the comprehensive overview of Congress. And I think we have touched on a lot of different topics and gave us a lot to think about, although some might not be the most uplifting of things. But I thank you for your continuous work on Burma policy. And like you said, we need to endure.
Every day when I hear from a Burmese person here in the US who has just sent a message to the member of Congress or been present at a meeting, every day I hear about all the activism that people are taking, that we're helping to organize, but we're running with a herd of people. We're not the only ones doing the running here. Every day I see that, every day I see everyone's individual contribution, I get more optimistic. So again, I put it to people who are listening to this broadcast. You want to do something? You can do something. Click on these links, go to newmyanmar.org, join this herd, join this growing group of people, both Burmese and also non-Burmese friends of Burma. Join us. We will make that change.
We understand that for so many with ties to Myanmar, these past few years of conflict have left deep scars. It's more than understandable that many are currently struggling with mental health and seeking balance in the face of unimaginable loss, pain, and violence. These challenges weigh heavily, yet they are also a testament to the human capacity to endure. To all those now listening who carry these burdens, we extend our heartfelt well wishes. May you find moments of peace amid the chaos, strength to navigate the hardships, and hope to sustain you through the darkest of times. You're not alone, and we stand with you in solidarity and compassion.
Oba yarananda dayananga yaranaya dayanam boda yaranam